So nowadays people talk a lot about happiness, and as Eastern's paradox suggests, economic growth does not necessarily result in the increased level of happiness. So people discuss, for example, whether economic growth is so important because if economic grows and we do not become happier, then what is the point of it? And all these arguments are, I think, relevant at the time when we are increasingly aware of the ecological constraints of this planet, and we should be really behaving ourselves. Otherwise, the human species, as we know it, would be extinct in some decades or so. But having said that, this concept of whole concept of happiness, I think, is really problematic, and you know, it is probably dangerous to start from the assumption that we have a clear idea of what happiness is. Now, in an effort to explain why and how people make choices, people use this concept of utility functions. So, for example, when there are two choices like A and B, since I am a ramen noodle lover, let's say this is a choice between a miso ramen noodle or tonkotsu ramen noodle. So, which do I choose? And so utility function theory would suggest that I would choose A, miso ramen, if the utility value of the miso ramen is higher than the tonkotsu ramen noodle. Of course, it depends on prices and so on, but you can always make this assumption that actually the utility functions of some choice items would guide us through the complicated process that we call life, and this is fine. So so in order to explain how people make choices, you can use utility functions, and you can make more complex models where you put temporal dimensions and plannings and trade-offs and all these things. But the basic fact that we as human beings would choose items with higher utility values stands. I mean, this is a basic assumption. That is fine. Now, when it comes to the perceived utility, not necessarily directly, connected to any choices or judgments, but this idea that whether you are satisfied with your life and so on, then it becomes a problem of cognitive process is where you review your whole life and say, okay, out of the scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you? And okay, I think it'll be 7 or it'll be 8 and these things. And, so there's this overall assessment of your life that can come into play. And so this perceived utility is different from the decision utility or whatever. I mean, when you make a choice, utility functions are relevant, and so there are these two different concepts of utility, and the relationship between these different concepts of utility is very important, interesting, and so I have issues with these concepts of perceived utility because it in cognitive science there is this famous effect called Dunning-Kruger effect, right? This was discovered by Dunning and Kruger, obviously, and they discovered that in the classroom, those students who were actually excellent underestimated their, position, quartile within the classroom. But these students who were not so blessed, these students who were not so, able, actually overestimated their relative excellence within the class. So this, in a nutshell, is a Dunning-Kruger effect. So I suspect that in the assessment of perceived utility in your life, there might be actually something similar to the Dunning-Kruger effect because, happiness actually might come from ignorance. I mean, or the acceptance of your limited self, which is nice. I mean, from Eastern philosophy point of view. Of course, I'm from Japan, and Japanese Zen philosophy has always stressed the importance of accepting your own imperfection and shortcomings. Having said that, if somebody is satisfied and happy in a given condition, then it might also mean that he or she is not aware of the possibilities where sky is the limit. And if, I'm not just talking about money, I'm not just talking about social status or so. For example, when you play music, and you might play music nicely, but at the same time, there might be really almost unlimited scale of musicality that you can ascribe to. And if you're not aware of this whole range, then you would be, of course, satisfied being here. But that, for me, appears to be lack of, you know, knowledge and lack of metacognition. So I would say that lack of metacognition and lack of knowledge can actually result in a high level of perceived utility, life satisfaction, happiness. So, in that sense, the very idea of happiness is suspect. And, it is quite relevant when you think of authoritarian nations in the world. I'm not, naming names here, but, those nations where there's an authoritarian government and, they apply artificial intelligence and contemporary information technology to control citizens. And when people criticize these governments, they would typically say that, well, but wait, look at our people. They were satisfied. Their life, quality is growing up, and they have more food, they have more clothes, and they are in better houses, and they have cars, and so they are satisfied. And this is what the governments of a very authoritative nation would typically say. Okay, so there's this idea that you can provide people with happiness, right? I mean, as if it was ration, ration of happiness. I mean, handing out happiness to people, and in spite of the fact that there's no freedom in that of speech or freedom of action in that nation. So is that what we want? I think this is a dystopia that many people, including Aldous Huxley, I mean, in his, a Brave New World, I mean, he mentions this all-purpose drug, Soma. And when people use Soma, they become happy. So in that sense, although this is an authoritarian government, people can be made happy as long as they have Soma and Soma vacations. But is this what we want? I mean, in the Declaration of Independence of the United States, they state this idea that pursuit of happiness is very important, right? And I would say that at this point that the pursuit of happiness is probably much more important than the actual perceived level of happiness, because the actual perceived level of happiness can be, the result of ignorance and lack of metacognition, as we have discussed, or the fact that the government, which might be an authoritarian regime, might provide people with happiness, like happiness rations, or handing out Soma, or something equivalent to that. And, that, for me, is not satisfactory. I would be more satisfied in the, in the metacognitive sense, if I have the freedom to pursue my own happiness. because happiness can be different from people to people. So there is no accepted common um, basis for happiness, actually, because we are all different. So it seems, you know, both morally and aesthetically and perhaps statistically wrong to collect a big data of people's perceived happiness and analyze it as if, and adding it and averaging it and so on, as if these perceived level of happiness are comparable. I mean, it is in principle different from people to people. So, although probably I stop here today and probably come back to this later because this is a very important concept and issue. But I do have issues with this idea that perceived utility or people's life satisfaction is an important policy guidance, and because it's everywhere. This argument is everywhere. But I do think that this whole idea about happiness is, for the lack of better words, very suspect, and we should really dig deeper than this in order to arrive at the very core of our humanity. Otherwise, we would be doomed without the Earth's ecological system collapsing. We would collapse before that.